Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles and comment on the ones I find interesting. In this episode, the week ending the 1st of February 1925, the corruption of youth and the corruption of Canadians. But first, some of the other items that have caught my attention this week. Former Prime Minister Herbert Asquith, who lost his seat at the last general election, has been elevated to the peerage. He will now be known as the Earl of Oxford. The appeal for the restoration of St Paul's Cathedral has reached £200,000. Think 40 million in today's money. Regular listeners may remember that I said 80 million last week, sorry. Yeah, I got the calculation wrong. There are reports that there has been a bad Irish potato harvest. The eclipse that I mentioned last week turned out to be a damp squib. It was too cloudy to be properly observed. Last week I mentioned that Leon Trotsky had been removed from his post as president of the Revolutionary War Council. This week the main Soviet newspapers, Izvestia and Pravda, published his defence. This was a surprise to me. By the 1980s that would have been impossible. Dissenting opinions were totally suppressed. It would appear that while Stalin is able to lever Trotsky out of power, he is not yet able to silence him completely. In the 14th of September 1924 episode, I mentioned that there had been a coup in Chile. This week there has been another one. It is far from clear what the motivation is. The last of the Munich Putsch conspirators has been released from Landsberg jail. No mention of the guy with the moustache. There is a reason for this. He was released on December the 20th, and the Times reported it, and yours truly completely missed it. This week there's been some good news for aristocrats, by which I mean those who favour aristocracy over democracy as a governing principle. Last week I mentioned that the Times had started referring to Spain's dictator as Primo de Rivera. Well, aristocrats can breathe a sigh of relief. This week they're back to calling him the Marquis de Estella. Sun Yat-sen, leader of the Chinese Revolution that toppled the monarchy in 1911 and now ruler of his own mini-state in Canton, has been taken ill. For the last few months, the London County Council, not to be confused with the much older City of London, has been pondering what its motto should be. A couple of weeks ago it decided on London, which is about as enlightening as a Kamala Harris speech. This week it's been told by the Garter Principal King of Arms that that particular motto is unacceptable. On Friday, an article remarked on the exceptionally high rainfall Britain had received over the past year. Oddly enough, this has not caused people to claim that the planet is doomed, blame the burning of fossil fuels, and glue themselves to railway signal boxes while waving Just Stop Coal banners. Instead, they have been considering ways of shoring up the Thames's flood defences. Shoring up, from a rather different threat, has been exercising Lieutenant Governor Cockshut of Ontario. Today the danger is not from armed hosts, but from the insidious, incessant invasion of thought disseminated by means of the American press in books, magazines, and their daily newspapers. These not only affect our mental tastes and opinions on public affairs, but also hold up to us constantly the luxuries and attractions of our prosperous neighbour. Luxuries and attractions, eh? The fiends! But whatever the case, what a jolly good job they've done. That's the Canadians, that is. They've preserved their version of football, which has 4 downs instead of the ridiculous 3 in America. They have preserved their slightly odd pronunciation of out. And Canadians continue to assert their superiority over their southern neighbour every time they put an A at the end of a sentence. Yes, there have been some small signs of American influence down the years, but apart from cars, movies, music, TV, ads, signposts, accents, words, corporations, spellings, fashion, sports, rude words, rude gestures, and fast food, nothing much to speak of. And anyway, who wants to be accused of cultural appropriation? If anything, it's been the other way. Ice hockey has been a hugely successful export. A bit too successful. It is 30 years since a Canadian team won the Stanley Cup. I was amused by the bit about armed hosts. Given the country's relative performances in the First World War, if hostilities had broken out, my money would have been on the Canadians. What did young people do before the invention of TikTok and Tide Pods? I hear you ask. Or should that be, what did old people worry that young people were up to before the invention of TikTok and Tide Pods? A Times editorial has the answer. Not for the first time in the history of London, the minds of some of its inhabitants are at the present moment much exercised on the subject of nightclubs. A couple of days earlier, the Home Secretary had met a deputation organised by the London Public Morality Council, the Charing Cross Vigilance Society, and the Temperance Council of Christian Churches. And if that wasn't a barrel of laughs, I don't know what is. Among the more youthful and therefore more numerous of their frequenters, there seems to be an idea that, like shingled hair or wireless telephony, shingled hair is a bob, they are a product of the age. It is this delusion common to the young of each generation in its turn, which partly accounts for the strength of the lure that keeps them up to all hours, as their aunts would say, dancing and supping, when older and perhaps saner people are in bed and asleep. When it comes to delusions common to the young of each generation, see also the idea that communism can be made to work. They think that they are doing something that is new, and therefore dashing and bohemian. In their own eyes they are savouring delights which to the old fogies are a sealed book, or rather a book which has never been opened. The elderly cynic who in his day held precisely the same view knows better. He could tell them, if they would but listen, that these youthful diversions are as old-fashioned as hansom cabs and chaperones, as prehistoric as chignons and crinolines. So, chaperones were old-fashioned by the 1920s. I did not know that. A chignon is a sort of hairbun, and a crinoline was the thing that held Victorian skirts out. Just now, because of the craze for dancing and the one-partner habit evolved by the war and its reactions... The one-partner habit? You mean to say pre-war people danced in groups? The one-partner habit evolved by the war and its reactions, they... meaning nightclubs, are enjoying a renewed vogue, and the nightclubs and their proprietors are making hay while the fever lasts. In these so-called clubs, writes the so-called Times so-called writer, in these so-called clubs the unsophisticated find other thrills besides the wild excitement, a revulsion from the restraints of their nursery and schoolboy days, of sitting up late. For most of them, the penetration into these underground cellars or closely guarded upper rooms, regarded from time immemorial as the proper environment for this pseudo-form of club life, has about it a certain spice of adventure. To drink bad champagne at exorbitant prices in forbidden hours, to feel that the fascinating stranger laboriously making merry in the corner may be an emissary of Scotland Yard disguised as a reveller, or better still, that the place may at any moment be raided by the police, are hectic joys not to be tasted in the humdrum drawing-rooms of Mayfair. I think the writer knows perfectly well this is just something that young people do. Anyway, that's all for this week. At this point, I believe I'm supposed to say something about liking and subscribing, if you're logged in, that is. In the meantime, I aim to have something up next week, but I promise nothing.